So my last review was on Mischief Makers, a fun, charming, and unique hidden gem on the N64 made by Treasure. You should check that out for my full thoughts, and that game needs more attention. Now, in that video, I had mentioned that Mischief Makers was the only Treasure game I've played, even though they're best known for their first game, Gunstar Heroes, on the Sega Genesis. Now, I was a Nintendo kid. I didn't even know what a Sega was, so obviously I never had a chance to play it. But it just so happens that I have a friend who loves Gunstar Heroes, and after he saw my Mischief Makers review, he bought me the game on Steam and wants me to review it. So, that's what I'm gonna do. Again, my only exposure to Treasure was Mischief Makers. All of their previous games had been Sega exclusive, but I would eventually learn of Gunstar Heroes. I had seen playthroughs of it before, but never got around to playing it. I had a bit of an interest in trying it eventually, but it was very low on my priority list. But now I have no excuse, so let's get right into it.
In the red corner!
The story of Gunstar Heroes is a bit confusing. Not because it's complex or anything, because there's barely any of it in the game. You turn the game on and you get this scene that tells you pretty much nothing. These three guys are apparently trying to stop M. Bison from something? Looks like we'll need to turn to the manual for this one. So there was this android called Gold and Silver who came to the planet Gunstar 9 to suck it dry of resources. But he was stopped by Professor White and imprisoned on the moon after he extracted the 4 gems that powered it. And now the Empire is trying to collect these gems to revive Gold and Silver to, I guess, take over the world.
Of course!
You play as the Gunstar twins, Gunstar Red and Gunstar Blue. They also have a sister, Gunstar Yellow, and an older brother, Gunstar Green. All the characters are named after colors for some reason, not that I'm complaining that the main character is red. The only character not named after a color is this M. Bison looking guy. Well, the manual refers to him as Colonel Red, at least I think it does. It makes it sound like he's the leader of the Empire, which is wrong because General Gray is. And also, the game itself calls him Smash Daisaku. His name is Smash Daisaku. It's more unique, and besides, Red is already taken. So General Gray sends his subordinates to find the 4 gems, pink, orange, black, and Gunstar Green. Without the manual, you wouldn't know that Green was actually brainwashed, and it's a bit confusing since the intro shows him on your side and doesn't show him betraying you. But the Gunstar twins reclaimed the gems, however while they were doing that, Gray had kidnapped Yellow, and that's the only thing she does in this entire game. Gray demands that they hand over the gems if they want Yellow back, and without any other choice, they comply. Gray then leaves for the moon with Red and Blue giving chase. They manage to fight their way in, defeating all of Gray's henchmen in the process, and when they confront him, he brings out the gems, but they turn on him. The gems then reawaken Gold and Silver, but the Gunstar twins manage to destroy the gems. However, Gold and Silver retreats, heading to Earth. Red and Blue go after him, but are out of weapons. Gray tries to stop it, but it doesn't work. Green then appears, having snapped out of it, and sacrifices himself to destroy Gold and Silver. And that's it. That's how the game ends. The story is a bit different in the Japanese version, and that's apparently the canon version, but honestly, you don't come to Gunstar Heroes for the story. All you need to know is Gold and Silver bad, Empire want to revive it, stop them. And frankly, that's enough. In my Mischief Makers review, I had mentioned that when it comes to pixel art, I greatly prefer 32-bit and onward, and that I don't much care for 8-bit, and even 16-bit wasn't good enough. But I don't think I gave 16-bit pixel art enough credit. While yes, for the most part 16-bit doesn't really do much for me, there are still some very impressive looking 16-bit games. I immediately think of the Donkey Kong Country trilogy when it comes to very good looking 16-bit games. Also Jurassic Park Part 2 The Chaos Continues, and Yoshi's Island. And I think I can say Gunstar Heroes also belongs on that list. The game is very colorful and has an exaggerated cartoonish art style that looks pretty good. Character designs are all distinct, their look and animations are full of personality. Smash Daisaku is a pretty fun villain with his stretchy legs and laugh. I'm no expert on the Genesis or what it's capable of, but this game looks pretty impressive from a technical aspect. You get stuff like the entire background moving with the boss, the ship crashing while you're still playing, and this entire fight on a helicopter. Also, one technique they use is having multiple sprites to form one big enemy. This was also used a lot in Mischief Makers, and it looks so good. This makes them way more animated than if it was just one big sprite. Let's compare it with, say, Donkey Kong Country. These games are often praised as being some of the best looking games of that era, and I agree they are very good looking, but the bosses are limited in the animation department. All this beaver does is hop around, all this zinger does is fly around, and this drum doesn't even have any animations. Even the bosses in the other games, which are even more impressive graphically, are still like that. Compare this to the first form of Seven Force, who's a lot more animated. And since each piece of it is a separate sprite, they wouldn't have needed to make each frame of the running animation multiple times to accommodate for when his arm is extended and when it fires out. Plus, this also allows for his arm to accurately aim directly at you seamlessly. Maybe it isn't a fair comparison, but the point is making each piece of a boss a separate sprite allows for more seamless animation, and goddamn it just looks cool. I loved it in Mischief Makers, and it's interesting to see where that game got it from. This game really likes to show off, and it definitely impressed me. And now for the soundtrack, and man does this game sound like a Genesis game. The music is pretty good. It's intense and energetic, and it does a good job of getting you pumped to destroy everything. I really like the way the first level music starts. The rest of the song is good too, but I wish the beginning few notes would play more than just the start. Other tracks I enjoy are Green's boss theme, Orange's boss theme, and the credits theme. It's not a soundtrack I'd listen to outside the game, aside from a few tracks, but it's great while playing and it fits well. Also, this game has a sound test, and every game should have a sound test. But enough of that.
It's time to blow it up!
Gunstar Heroes is a side-scrolling run-and-gun game. Think Contra, but with everything cranked up to 11. This is a genre I have very little experience with. The only game like it I've played is Jurassic Park Part 2 The Chaos Continues, and that's a fair bit different. You play as Red. The only way to play as Blue is with co-op, and that's fine by me. When you start, you get a couple choices. First is choosing a firing mode between free shot and fixed shot. Free shot allows you to move while shooting, but if you try to aim at a diagonal, you'll be moving in that direction, making it a bit tough to be completely accurate. Fixed shot makes it so when you shoot, you are locked in place, which helps with aiming, but you are unable to dodge while shooting. Honestly, I think free shot is much better than fixed. Sure, fixed shot allows for more precise aiming, but at the cost of mobility. And this is the kind of game where you're gonna want to be moving a lot. Things can get really intense with loads of enemies and projectiles, not to mention keeping the damage to bosses going while being able to avoid their attacks. Now, that's not to say fixed shot is useless. Some weapons are much more useful with fixed shot than free shot, and there are times where I see fixed shot being more ideal. But the issue is, once you choose either of them, it's locked in for the rest of the game. There's no going back, and I feel that free shot has much more utility for the majority of the game. To put this into perspective, I had a harder time playing on easy with fixed shot than I did playing on normal with free shot. Now, I'm willing to accept I just suck with fixed shot. I'm sure there are others who can use it just fine, but I think free shot is overall the better option. If there was an option to switch between them, then I'd have no problem. But this is a Genesis game, and the standard Genesis controller only has 3 buttons on it, and all 3 of them are used up, so there's no convenient way you could switch between them. They could have made it possible to change between them in the pause menu. It would disrupt the gameplay a bit, but at least you would have the option. Now after you choose that, you get to choose your starting weapon. This is the weapon you begin with and the one you will have after dying, regardless of whatever other weapon you might have. There are 4 weapons: a machine gun, a laser, a homing shot, and a flamethrower. The machine gun is a good fast weapon with decent power. The laser is less powerful than the machine gun, but can pierce through enemies. The homing shot is the weakest weapon, but aiming isn't required, and the flamethrower is the most powerful, but it's short-ranged. My favorite is the homing shot, and I don't think I need to explain why. Now you can hold on to 2 weapons at a time and switch between them with the press of a button, but the cool thing about this weapon system is that you can combine the 2 guns you have. If you pick up 2 of the same weapon, it makes a better version of it. But if you have 2 different weapons, you can combine them together. A machine gun and a flamethrower will create an explosive shot. The laser with the flamethrower will make a very short range but very powerful beam. My favorite is the homing shot with the laser. You do not need to aim at all. This weapon system is pretty fun to mess around with and adds some replay value. There are some drawbacks though. Some combinations are more useful than others, and how useful some are is tied to what firing mode you picked. The homing flamethrower is really only good if you're using fixed shot because it follows your inputs. However, the other homing shot combinations are much more useful in free shot, especially the homing laser. And speaking of the homing shot, even though I do like it in most of its combinations, you can't control who it tracks. This isn't a problem with a single or double homing shot as it shoots a bunch of projectiles. But with the homing laser, as good as it is at clearing the screen and eating through bosses, sometimes when things get hectic, it can get annoying when it doesn't target who you want it to target. Plus, it has a tendency to lock onto things that can't be destroyed. I do think that, in general, this is one of the best, if not the best weapon in the game, but that doesn't mean it's best in every scenario, which is fine since it encourages changing weapons. And then there's the homing machine gun, which took me a while to figure out. What it's supposed to be is basically a more powerful machine gun that tracks an enemy. And when it's working for you, it's a pretty good weapon, but if it tracks someone behind you, it will just shoot directly up. If it only tracked enemies in front of you, this wouldn't be a problem. And also, sometimes you just don't have a good weapon for the situation. The weapons can appear in boxes, or from these robot birds. And by the way, if you shoot the bird, you only get 1 item out of it, but if you melee it, it will drop more. It took me a while to figure that out. However, what weapon you get is random, which is fine most of the time, but depending on your starting weapon, you could get in a situation where the game gives you inefficient tools. Now, with the amount of combinations there are, you're bound to get something that works well. But to be safe, I wouldn't recommend picking up the flamethrower as your starting weapon. Now, Red can do everything you'd expect: run, jump, and eradicate everything in the vicinity with a pull of a trigger. But guns aren't his only offensive option. If he's close enough to an enemy, instead of shooting, he can throw them, which does a lot of damage. He can even do it to bosses. I wonder if that inspired Mischief makers. By holding down and jumping, he can do a slide kick, and by pushing the jump button in the air, he does this dive attack. He can also wall jump, and doing it will automatically perform the dive. Also, apparently you can block. I found that out while looking at the manual after I finished recording the game, so, oops. With this, as well as the weapon system, Red is quite the versatile character. This game can be played in co-op too. The second player is Blue. Ha, Blue is number 2. Blue can do everything Red can do. Now, I wasn't able to play this with a second player, but from what I've seen, when there are 2 players, each of your weapons are weaker. But if one dies, the other's gun will be back to full power. The player that died can come back at the cost of half of the other player's health. The same health system was in that Jurassic Park game I mentioned. But anyways, let's see what our heroes are up against. There isn't a lot of enemy variety, and most of the time you're fighting standard mooks that are easy to take care of but often come in large numbers. They'll mostly try to go up to you and deliver a melee attack or throw you. They also will sometimes hold you in place, but you can get out of it by mashing the attack button. They also can occasionally shoot or throw bombs at you. And there are various vehicles they can ride in. But other enemies include these drones, bomb dispensers, and phantoms, which are just stronger mooks who also drop health. Unlike Contra, you have health, and while it starts at 100, picking up health will bring it up even farther. I've never maxed it out, so I'm not sure where it peaks, but I really like that it can be increased past the starting total. It can get annoying in other games when you find a good healing item while at full health. Also, after completing a stage, the amount of health you start with is increased by 20. There are 7 stages in the game. That's not a lot. Most, if not all, Mega Man games have more levels than that. But that won't be a problem if it's fun enough. Speaking of Mega Man, you start off with the choice between 4 levels. You can play them in any order you like, but I usually go by the order they're listed. The goal is the same for all of them. Fight your way to the boss, defeat the boss, next stage. But each level has something unique about it. Pink and Orange's stages are pretty straightforward, go right and destroy everything in sight. Pink's stage also has the section where you climb up a pyramid, and after defeating the mini-boss you slide down the other side, and Orange's stage starts with a vertical climb before jumping on his ship. In Green's stage, you're riding this vehicle and constantly moving forward. You can't perform any melee attacks while on it, but you can ride on the ceiling and walls. One annoying thing about this stage is that it can be difficult to pick up health and weapons since it will move off screen quickly, and to pick them up you need to be holding down and then push the attack button. And you need to do that while trying to avoid all these enemies. I can't tell you how many times I missed health or a weapon I wanted because of this. And then there's Black Stage. It starts with some running and gunning, but then you enter the Dice Palace. This part is like a board game. You roll the dice and get to move 1 to 3 spaces, and each space has a different event. Most are fights, but there are 3 item rooms to refill health and change weapons. This part is cool, and also annoying. It can be annoying when you get low rolls or move past item spaces or land on a space you don't want. There are 2 spaces I really don't like. This one where you fight this rock monster, but you don't have any weapons. It's really hard to hit him without getting hit. And then there's this space that sends you back to the beginning. Now you don't have to redo any spaces you've already beaten, but it gives you more of an opportunity to land on ones you skipped. The only benefit is you get another chance to land on item spaces you missed. I do like this level as a whole, it's just those 2 spaces that I don't like. After beating the first 4 levels, the next 3 are in a set order. First up is this level that's just a straight path with a lot of enemies. This level really reminds me of the first level of the final area in Mischief Makers. It's also a straight line with enemies constantly spawning. They're also both broken up into 4 sections. The first section has red enemies and ends with a red phantom. The screen will continue until you defeat it. Then there are gray enemies, then yellow enemies, and finally green enemies. In Mischief Makers, while the enemies aren't color-coded, at the end of each segment you find a walker. The first is red, the second is blue instead of gray, but the third is yellow, and the fourth is green. Next level is a space shooter, and I really don't like this level. So the controls are a bit different. You can move anywhere on screen, and you have a dash move. You use the same weapons, but aiming them is a bit different. So you have a turret on your ship, and it will point in the direction you are moving, but once you start shooting, it's locked in place regardless of which direction you're going. Now, it can be helpful to keep shooting in the same direction while also avoiding projectiles, but the problem comes from when you get hit, you stop shooting for a moment, and when that happens, it redirects the turret to where you are now going, which most of the time, you aren't moving in the direction of the thing you're shooting at, which means it goes off in the completely wrong direction. And once that happens, it can be a hassle to get it back to where you want to point it while also dodging enemy fire. Now, this isn't a problem if you're using the homing laser, but that also has its own problem, that being the asteroids. There are times when asteroids fly in, and the homing laser constantly targets them even though they can't be destroyed, and sometimes it makes them move into you. This is my least favorite level in the game because it's just annoying. But anyways, the final level is a boss rush. Now, the bosses are the main attraction with this game. Each stage has a boss at the end, and maybe even a mini-boss in the middle, and they range from good to amazing. Now, bosses were something I was a bit mixed on with Mischief Makers. The good bosses are some of my favorite bosses in any game, but there are a bunch of really easy and uninteresting bosses, particularly with the mini-bosses. But I could definitely say that Gunstar Heroes has a much better ratio of good bosses. There are a couple of uninteresting or annoying fights, going back to that no-gun space in the Dice Palace, but the majority are really fun, creative, and challenging. Every time you encounter a boss, it shows their name and lists a few attacks that they have, which is cool, and excuse me, does that say swapping reg? Don't you mean leg? Even when you fight Smash Daisaku, it calls his stretchy leg attack Bravu Reg. Bosses come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and you'd think with so many bosses that some of them would feel a bit samey. But not only for the most part, they're all pretty distinct, quite a few of them are also multi-phased. You fight Smash Daisaku a couple times, the second time he has more attacks. Then there's the core guard system, which has 3 phases. I find the first phase to be the hardest. For some reason, I just find the way the third phase runs in from the background funny. Like, dude, this would probably be easier for you if you weren't rotating the room. Now, you do fight each of the main bosses a second time in the boss rush, but this isn't your typical boss rush, where it's literally just the same fights again. For one thing, I love the way that it's presented. All the bosses behind this monitor waiting for their turn, and when it is, they leave so you know who you're gonna fight next. And then when you're done with it, you enter that same room. And when you actually fight them, it's a new boss. They have new strategies, new vehicles, different arenas. This is how you do a boss rush. Although Black's second fight can be a pain. And then there's Gold and Silver. Your main target are the gems, and while it can be pretty tough, he isn't too hard. Speaking of difficulty, this game has 4 difficulty modes. Easy, normal, hard, and expert. I did a playthrough on the former 3, but only sampled expert. It's mostly what you'd expect. You take more damage and deal less damage. I believe there are more enemies the harder it is, and they get more aggressive. The levels themselves don't seem to be very different. It's the bosses that have the most differences. They'll also be more aggressive, have faster attacks, fire more projectiles, and even have new attacks. I do like it when more than just numbers are tweaked with different difficulty modes. And it's cool seeing a familiar boss do new things. Although for most bosses, there's not a lot different. But there's one that stands above the rest. It's the boss you've been waiting for me to get to, and there's no way I wouldn't talk about it. 7 Force. If you've played this game before, you probably already consider this boss to be the best part of the game. And I'm inclined to agree. So what is 7 Force? It's the boss of the second level. I kinda question its placement. You can play these first 4 levels in any order you want, so you could save him for last, but even then you'd think he'd be later in the game. Hell, it's good enough to be the final boss. But anyways, 7 Force is Green's weapon, a transforming vehicle that, as its name implies, has 7 different forms. That's right, 7. Soldier Force, Tails Force, Tiger Force, Eagle Force, Blaster Force, Urchin Force, and Crab Force. I mentioned that before you fight a boss, it gives the name and a couple of its attacks, but with 7 Force, it lists all 7 of its forms, and when you see that for the first time, you know you're in for quite the battle. It always starts with Soldier Force, but every form afterwards is randomly selected. Each form is completely different, and most of them could be their own boss. Some forms are tougher than others. I tend to have a tough time with Urchin Force since you don't know which side you'll go up or down, and if you don't start jumping right away, you'll be taking a few hits. Eagle Force can also be hard to deal with, but as long as you pay attention and recognize the pattern, it's not too bad. There's also Blaster Force, which only does one thing: shoot you. After a few shots, it needs to reload. There's apparently an exploit where if you stand directly under it, it can't hit you at all. I didn't do that because that's lame and not fun. I want to beat this legitimately. And then there's Crab Force, which is probably the hardest form. You not only have to be paying attention to it so you know what attacks he's throwing, but you also need to have quick reflexes to be able to dodge them. If you have a strong enough weapon like the homing flamethrower or the fire laser, you can destroy all its projectiles. Now this boss has the best changes depending on the difficulty. It is still more aggressive, has faster attacks plus some extra attacks, but also the higher the difficulty, the more forms you need to fight. On easy, you only need to beat 3 forms. On normal, 5. And on hard and expert, you need to fight all 7 forms in a row without any health or checkpoints. Going through 7 bosses is quite the endurance. And let's put this into perspective here. The boss rush has you fight 6 bosses if you don't count gold and silver. Now you do fight 7 Force a second time in the space level, but instead of having to fight 7 forms, he constantly changes forms, which is cool, but nothing beats that first encounter. 7 Force is a boss so good that Treasure reused it in a couple other games. There's this game's sequel, obviously, and then Alien Soldier had its own 7 Force. Seeing how they used this boss in a game that had nothing to do with Gunstar Heroes makes me sad that there wasn't a 7 Force in Mischief Makers. I would have loved to have a boss concept like that in Mischief Makers. Plus they could do some pretty cool things with that game's grabbing mechanic. But anyways, 7 Force is magnificent. The crown jewel of this game and one of my favorite bosses. Yeah, this guy can be pretty hard too. it isn't uncommon for me to just barely manage to beat it. The entire game is pretty challenging. Even on normal, it can be a bit brutal, let alone harder, God forbid, expert. One thing that can be pretty annoying is, depending on the stage, this game is a bit stingy with checkpoints. Each stage only has one checkpoint, but where it's placed can be really helpful or annoying. In Green Stage, the checkpoint is right before 7 Force, which is good because you'll probably be dying to him a lot. But in others, you have to redo a lot to get back to where you died. In Pink Stage, the checkpoint is right before you fight Bravu Man, and that means if you die to Pink, you not only have to fight Bravu Man again with only your starting weapon, but you have to do this slide again and make your way back to Pink while trying to take as little damage as possible. The Dice Palace can be annoying since if you die at any point on the board, you have to start over. I've never died on Black, so I don't know if there's a checkpoint when you get to him, but considering every other level only has one checkpoint, yeah, don't lose to Black. And then there's this marathon of a level. There are no checkpoints at all. You have to go through all 4 sections full of endless waves of enemies and 2 phases of Smash Daisaku without dying once. It's a good thing Smash got rid of the final great soldier here. I don't think I could get past his love dancing. And then the space level. The portion in space has no checkpoints. You have to go through so many ships, lasers, and asteroids, not to mention the 1000mm gun, which has hard to avoid projectiles since you can't tell if they'll just fly off screen or explode into more projectiles, and then after all that you still need to go through 7 Force again. Oh, and of course there aren't any checkpoints in the boss rush. I had to use save states to get past this on hard. Sorry, but Black's second fight is such a pain, and I got tired of getting this far to die here, or take too much damage that I couldn't survive Green. That was the only time I used save states though, other than to save my progress. But despite the many times I died, despite the stingy checkpoints and the couple annoying parts, I never became frustrated at the game. Well, I came close in the space level, but at no point did I ever want to quit. Every time I died, all I wanted to do was try again. Never did I want to give up, and there's a reason for that. It really comes down to the fact that there's no live system. Because you aren't sent all the way back to the beginning for making too many mistakes, you don't get frustrated or demoralized. You may die a lot, but do you quit? No, you get back up and you try again until you win, because you have no excuse to stop. You've come this far, there's no going back. Like, I would say this game is harder than the original Super Mario Bros., but I've never actually beaten that game because if you die just a few times, you need to start the entire game from the beginning. And when that happens, I just get frustrated and I lose my patience, which results in me just quitting the game. I get really tired of having to replay the earlier levels to be able to try again at the part I messed up at. And at that point, I'm not having fun, so why should I even bother? But that doesn't happen in Gunstar Heroes because I can try a hard part as many times as I need to beat it. I'm actually able to learn the patterns and figure out the best strategy to get past it. It's hard to learn a hard part if you get sent back to the beginning. Even though some stages send you back pretty far, it's not so far back that it becomes frustrating. Sure, this gauntlet of a level as well as the space level took a while to beat, but it's not because they're really all that long, it's because I kept dying. But since I could keep trying again, I got better every attempt until I finally beat it. If it did have a live system and sent you back to the beginning, then I would have just abused save states like nothing else. Or I would have just not played the game. But I didn't, aside from that one time. And because I didn't have to worry about lives, I was able to just enjoy playing the game without the stress of being sent all the way back if I died too many times. And that is the mark of a game with good challenge. Gunstar Heroes was a pleasant surprise. Despite being a genre I have very little experience with, I still found it to be pretty fun. With fast, explosive gameplay, a pretty good challenge, and some really cool bosses. It's always nice to find a game that kicks your ass in a way that makes you want to beat it even more. There are some things I don't like, but any issues I really have are just nitpicks. The game is really short though. Depending on how good you are, it won't take much time to get through. It's one of those short but sweet games. And if it was longer, it would risk becoming repetitive. But it doesn't, and because of that, as well as the changes in each difficulty, and the weapon system, it's pretty replayable. I didn't get tired of it while doing multiple playthroughs. It was pretty interesting seeing Treasure's roots and noticing things that came back in Mischief Makers. I still prefer Mischief Makers, but I'm glad I played this. If you like side-scrolling run-and-gun games with a good challenge, then this might be a good game for you. It's been ported many times, so it's not hard to get. This game also has a sequel, Gunstar Superheroes on the Game Boy Advance, but I have no plans to cover that game, so sorry for anyone who would want that. But that's all I have to say. See you next time.
Oh, this is delicious!
Guess you won't be needing those tapes I made for you. You want me to get rid of them?
Don't be hasty. Not until I see those street fighters pummeled to dust, which should be any moment now. Yeah!